podcast.
I had to delay recording of this episode because there were a couple of cats in my house that decided it's snack time. And so I sit down here on Sunday evening, because this is church for all of us, to begin recording, and don't they all just come round? And since I have cat bowls proximal to my little recording studio, it's crunchy time. And that, kids, that is the real reality of what I'm doing here. I know it sounds exotic. I know it sounds like I have a full production team and we have a dedicated studio that is completely soundproofed and sterile. But nope. The truth is, I got cats munching away while I sit here looking at my watch, waiting on them. They finally had their fill, and off they went. And so now here I sit on Sunday evening with a eggnog spiked with rum, 'cause 'tis the season. And we're going to do this, and I don't know what's going to come out. One of the problems lately, over the past few months, for fairly obvious reasons, is that I just haven't really felt as though I've got a lot to say. A lot of my experience has been very internal. A lot of my experience has been very small, not for sharing. You go back to the last couple of episodes, you'll get the tea. I think that's a cool thing that the kids are saying. You'll get the tea on what's been going on in my private personal life. It has sucked a lot of the attention and a lot of the energy away from this program. And away from quite a lot of other things too, actually. I felt like there hasn't been a lot to say, and so I sit here on Sunday Eve. Not 100% sure I've got anything to say now either, but it is the end of the year, and I felt if nothing else, I should offer to all of you gentle listeners to this podcast my thank you for your ears low the past 11 and a half months. The funny thing is, I went back yesterday and I listened to the first episode that I released this year. The first episode of 2024. That episode, number 174, is called Slowly and Painfully, an Encouragement for 2024. And what it was, you can go back and listen to it yourself. It's actually a pretty good episode. I was pleased with it as I walked the neighborhood, freezing my face off and listening. Why do I live where the air hurts my face? And that was an episode based on the experience of the character Doom Guy in the Doom franchise. I'm not going to reiterate the whole episode here. There's a moment in Doom 2 where you think you've beaten the game, and then a notice comes through from HQ that, in fact, there's a whole other game to be played. More baddies to be shot. And so, slowly and painfully, you rise up off the floor and load up your shotgun shells and carry on into the fray. And that was my encouragement way back in January of 2024. Saying to people that we're all about fresh starts in January. We're all about starting something new or stopping something. We're all about making these big changes. But the truth of the matter is that sometimes it's not a big change you need to make. Sometimes it's simply a rededication to the task at hand. It's carrying on with whatever it is you've been doing. Because, especially in December, some of your dedications can peter out, right? You get busy with Christmas stuff and whatever it is that you do. December is always one of my favorite months, actually. I hate this particular December with all the friggin' snow we've had. I could do without that, thank you. But I like December. I like December for its parties. I like December for the festive vibe in the air. I like it for Christmas, and I like all of that, right? But what can happen in December is you get distracted from a lot of what you've been dedicated to. It's like you take your foot off the pedal at work, maybe. And in my case, I've got, I think, one gig booked for this month. Like, there's not a lot happening musically. And that can be kind of one way or the other. You know, sometimes your December is just loaded right up, especially if you are involved in an act that's doing a lot of Christmas stuff, that sort of thing. you're ramping up to New Year's Eve, whatever. And sometimes you're super busy in December and sometimes you're not. This is a not super busy December, so you're off at the parties, taking your foot off the gas at work. Maybe you're not all that busy, and it becomes, or you are busy, but doing other stuff that pulls you away from whatever you've been dedicated to. Might get off your diet, might get off your gym schedule, whatever it is that you've been working diligently at. A lot of times, December will take that away from you. And that's okay. Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes you need that break mentally, whatever. January, I was saying earlier this year, slowly and painfully, you just rededicate yourself to the task at hand. Rather than taking on all these resolutions, you kind of get back into the groove you were working before. And sometimes that's what's required. But what struck me as profound about that episode is that there was a moment where I said, sometimes life demands of you nerves of steel. Which is true. I just didn't know at the time quite how prophetic that was going to be. I thought I was doing a podcast for everybody out there. Truth is, it became exceedingly relevant to my own life. And I have had, over the past few months in particular, to have nerves of friggin' steel as I watched what I thought were the foundations of my life begin to crumble. Not dramatically, but very, very definitely. And so it's really interesting sometimes to take a look at Jan 2-4 compared to December 2-4. And you can do that for any year, What was life in January? What is life in December? Most of the time you'll find it's much the same. But then some years come along where things are profoundly different, And I didn't realize recording that episode that I was going to be talking to myself. Right, that the most important listener to that show, or the listener perhaps for which it had the most relevance, was actually going to be me 11 months later. As I look at a marriage that is ending, amicably, but still ending, and I look at the job that I'm suddenly in, that I was not anticipating being in, even though I was looking as far back as January. It's just really interesting to see the extent to which things have so dramatically changed. And how I've had to have the kind of nerves of steel that I was talking about. It's very easy under certain circumstances to fall apart, and you would be justified in doing so. And if you had told me a year ago, 11 months ago, 5 years ago, that these were going to be my circumstances in the end of 2024, that all of this change would have happened, I don't know if I would have had the nerves to handle it at certain points in my life. In fact, I know I wouldn't have, because I've looked at the way that I've responded to things in the past. And then I tend to take this wider view. I tend to try to place things into a pattern. And the story is very often deeper and wider than we think it is on the surface. I can be just looking at a relationship ending and getting a new job or whatever, life taking pretty dramatic turns in different directions. And you can feel as though, well, it's just been a 3 or so month process and my reaction to that. Not so at all. This is more like a 10-year process. Not necessarily the relationship, but though maybe, like these things, Philip McKernan, who I follow, says that he's a coach and a speaker and somebody whose work I really resonate with. I've heard him say in working with couples that most couples leave it 5 years too late to have the difficult conversation, right? The stuff that you might have been able to fix 5 years ago, but by the time somebody actually has the courage to bring it up, already too late. And maybe that's borne itself out in my case, maybe not. This is not what this podcast is for. But I can say that my reaction to all of this, my having more or less the nerves of steel required at times, not always, but more or less, this is a 10-year process. This is a 10-year process of all of the ego work. And it's been a torture at times. It's been a torture at times as I've been rolling down a German highway, doubled over as though there were a knife in my gut with a gallbladder attack, and all of that related to stress. Stress caused by ego. What did the Buddha say? all suffering is attachment, right? And all attachment is ego. And I have lived at times in my life so egoically. That does not mean arrogantly. That does not mean with all this attitude. It simply means working from a place where my ego is in charge, right? Wanting to be wanted in this band, wanting to be acknowledged by people out there, wanting to be recognized as a good drummer or whatever, because of my own insecurity, like my ego needing to be reassured, and living and working from that place rather than working from a spiritual place that is simply surrendering into moments, surrendering into opportunities, being grateful, and working from this much more elevated place. I worked for so long from ego and from insecurity. Remember that insecurity is ego. It's your ego wanting reassurance and not feeling good enough. And all of that is the ego stuff, but we are not egos. All right? Our egos are useful to us. Our egos are what keeps us alive. Our egos are what give us ambition, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But we are not ego. All right? We are something far deeper and far beyond that. But when I started off on this journey, particularly in music, like 14 years ago, it was all ego. It was all ego. It was all insecurity. It was all fear. And all of those things are your human ego fearing for its own existence. But we are not that. We are spirit. We are pieces of God, man. And that part of us, that spiritual part of us, that deeper part of us, the part of us that knows we're afraid is not afraid, right? 10, 12, 14 years ago, I'm not hip to that. Okay, I'm still working from a very egoic perspective. And I've had to go through all of these crucibles that I keep talking about. All right, getting dropped from bands, not getting gigs that I wanted, having stuff not go as well as I hoped it. Well, just going through this whole process over and over and over and over and over again of being a side player in the music world, which is very unstable. I mean, even if you're doing great, you can find yourself out. Your gig can disappear. Stuff happens all the time. It is not for the faint of heart being a side player. If you land a consistent 10-year side player gig, you've done really, really well, because that's a bit of an anomaly. That's a bit rare. But you don't know that going in, right? You don't realize the lay of the land. If you're like me, you come into this working from ego, working from insecurity, working from not feeling good enough. You're in for a rough ride, Jack. And I've had one. But the thing is, I brought most of the rough ride upon myself. And it's all the way you react to things, right? If you allow and surrender to things, say you lose a gig, your ego is devastated by that. And if you work from an egoic place, all you get is the devastation. But if you're working from a place of allowing, if you are working from a place of trusting the universe, trusting life, trusting the timing, then it takes the edge off that. And you say to yourself, okay, this work here is done. There is something different, something better that needs to come in now. And more often than not, I found that that's true. But again, I had to bash my head against walls for years, just going through these crucibles in music and learning over time what the Buddha was talking about when he talks about attachment. Attachment to an artist, attachment to a gig, attachment to a perception out there, attachment to a reputation, attachment. And I attached to everything. I fell to all of the attachments, and I suffered the wounds. I suffered the 1,000 cuts, man. I suffered the gallbladder attacks. I suffered the depressions. I suffered the fear. I suffered the anxiety. And then eventually along came the big one. Because as I've said before, this is kind of a greatest hits episode, but as I've said before, life will give you gentle nudges and keep doing that. But eventually, if you don't listen or pay attention to those nudges, life's eventually going to club you over the head with what you need. If you're in a relationship and you know you shouldn't be, life is going to, or your partner is going to give you nudges that say, I shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be here. This is not right. This is not right. This is not right. And if you don't listen to that, it's going to get louder. It's going to get bigger. It's going to get heavier until it clubs you over the head. Your partner cheats on you. Oh, yeah, I guess this really is over. But the corresponding devastation is all the heavier because you left it all the longer. I don't know if I'm articulating that well, and that is not the case with me, but generally speaking, eventually, when you don't pay attention to the nudges, life is going to bag you over the head. So I had all these years of the nudges saying to me how much attachment I had, right? To how people felt about me as a musician, to the gigs I was playing, to needing to have my tires pumped, needing my ego to be fluffed and fed all of the time, just to allay some of the insecurity in my life, and then losing gigs or not getting gigs and taking that very personally, reacting very egoically. I had all these warning shots, all of these warning shots, driving down a German highway, doubled over with a gallbladder attack over the anxiety about a gig, is a pretty heavy duty warning shot that, hey, Jack, maybe you're attached, and upon the evidence, attachment's not working great for you, and you're going to miss out on the really great fried fish at the end of the trip because you can't keep anything down. You can't stomach anything, literally. But I still didn't learn. I still maintained the attachments. They would lessen a little bit, and I would sort of get it. Not quite getting it. And then when the pandemic happened, and COVID hit, and the George Floyd riots hit, and I just freaked out. Right? I popped. I had an anxiety breakdown, the likes of which I wouldn't wish upon you ever. It was horrendous. It was awful. It was the worst experience of my life. And it was all of the nudges ignored. This was the bag over the head. This was spirit. This was the universe. This was source saying, dude, listen. Will you listen? Right? What is anxiety? Anxiety is a fear of a loss of control. What is control? Ego at work. And I was wrapped up, hook, line, and sinker, man. I was wrapped up in it. The whole ego trip that for years the universe had been trying to nudge me out of. Dude, stop with the attachment. Stop with the ego. Let it go. Trust, surrender. Very difficult to do. And I've got some psychology involved in that makes it that much more difficult. Eventually you have an anxiety breakdown and you can no longer deny because you lose yourself. You lose control. I lost control, and that's what anxiety is, the great fear of losing control, right? And so I had this awful experience throughout most of 2020 and a great chunk of 2021 where I had to face the roughest of crucibles, which was an anxiety breakdown, an ego breakdown. And the resounding message was surrender, let it go, surrender control, right? Surrender the need to control everything in your life. And you come by that honestly. That is a fear thing. That is something you pick up in childhood. I haven't even untangled where that need came from. But it was a resounding message that you must surrender control now. Give it up and let it go. And if you're an anxious person, if you're an ego person, that's your greatest fear. One of them. I mean, bigger it's your greatest esoteric fear is losing control. But this is what life sometimes demands of you. It's what the universe sometimes demands of you. Let go and allow, right? And so I went through all those crucibles and then met the final boss in 2021. Came through that anxiety, began at long last to release my attachments, to release my need for control, right? To surrender into circumstances, as the Tao says, to have faith in the way things are. And I had to go through the hardest thing in order to finally begin to live that way and to live from not so much an egoic, but a much more spiritual point of view. And I'm not all the way there. Okay. I still have the ego issues at times. I still have stuff. I mean, none of us is perfect. We are all works in progress. Very few ever become realized beings. All right. Even Ram Dass was not a realized being in the end. He just got really, really close, I think. And so you come to this crucible of my marriage falling apart and me needing to get a job and me interviewing for jobs that I'm qualified for that would have made a lot of sense on paper and not getting them when I really needed them. And that's where the nerves of steel came in, right? It's like getting told that you didn't get the job that you really kind of needed and would have made a lot of sense and would have solved a lot of problems for you, a lot of sudden problems for you. Not getting that, and it's kind of getting metaphorically knocked to your knees, but having the nerves of steel in those cases, which is not falling apart, right? Which is checking yourself, feeling it, slowly and painfully getting back up and entering the fray. And I wouldn't have had the nerve to do that. I wouldn't have had the ability to allow what's been unfolding to unfold without having gone through all of these crucibles. I did not have the nerve 10 years ago to handle something like this. I have it now, on the evidence at least, because I've had to go through all of these processes of learning to let go, learning to surrender, learning to allow. When you get into a very, very bad mental state, it's when you don't allow things. It's when you resist things that you get into this problem. So if I resist this marriage breakdown and I fight it and I come from ego and I want to win and I want to make this difficult and I get really upset, that's all ego. That is not allowing. That is trying to control, right? That is trying to push things in a certain direction that they don't want to go. And the resistance is painful, right? The resistance is painful. You hold on to that rope and it burns your palms. Let the rope go, and trust that there's a net, I've had to learn this over and over and over the very, very, very hard way. But thank God, thank Source, thank whatever, thank the universe that I've gone through enough crucibles to reach this point where this final boss can be staring me in the face and I have the nerve. And I have the nerve because it's not mine. It's not my nerve. It's an allowing. It's a surrendering into this situation. And when you don't resist it, you just don't come up against those sharp edges. You don't come up against those walls. You don't keep beating your head against the door frame. You allow it. You surrender into it. And that's not making it easy. And I've not always been successful at that. There's I don't know if it's a Buddhist or a Taoist proverb that I'm going to kind of mangle right here, but you'll get the point. There was this farmer and he had this beautiful horse. And one day the beautiful horse ran away and they lost the beautiful horse. And all the neighbors came around and said, "Geez, man, really lousy that you lost the beautiful horse." And the farmer's response is, "We'll see." Just that, very neutral. "We'll see." And then a couple of days later, the horse returns and he returns with like 7 other horses behind him. Went off into the wild, found a posse, brought him home. And everybody says, "Oh, wow, look, farmer, you've got all these horses now. That's amazing." And he says, "We'll see." And then I forget what happens. No, I remember. So it brings back all these wild horses. And so the farmer's son gets up on one of the wild horses to try to tame it. And the horse bucks and the kid flies off, breaks his leg. And everybody gathers around and says, "Oh, this is terrible news. The kid just broke his leg." And the farmer says, "We'll see." And then a week later, a war breaks out and the army comes along recruiting all of the able-bodied young men to go off and fight the war. And kid's got a broken leg. Kid can't go off to the war. And maybe all the able-bodied young men went off and got slaughtered in the war. And that opened up great market opportunities for the farmer and his kid with the broken leg. And it goes on and it goes on and it goes on. The point being that the farmer is very neutral. The farmer is just allowing life to happen. Not getting too high, not getting too low about it. And that's where you begin to not run up against resistance. I've not been great at that, but I've done just well enough to keep it together during this very, very strange and difficult time in my life. And I swear it's all down to the ego work that I've done and then the ego obliteration that happened. And it's interesting, because you come to this point in the year and it's been in some ways a pretty rough year. And you look back at it and you say, well, what's good? If nothing else, what's been good about this year? Because there's been some bad, all right? There's been some heavy, but what's been good? And what's been good, partly, is just the realization that I've made a little bit of progress. I've made a little bit of existential spiritual progress, and the evidence is found in the way I've been able to respond to this marriage breaking down, because it can destroy you if you let it, and it destroys a lot of people. And yeah, of course it does. I mean, it's devastating for some people. Mine has been not acrimonious. Okay, it's been amicable, and that certainly helps. And in my case, it's been just being able, up to a certain point, to not work so much from ego, which I don't think I could have done before. And so I look at the circumstances of this year, and it's like, well, that's a good thing. This realization that I've made a little bit of progress out of the absolute nightmare that unfolded a few years ago. It's nice to see when you fast forward that there was some fruit in that. There was some fruit in that. And it's nice to be reassured, right? It's nice to be reassured that, in fact, the net will appear. You can have a certain amount of faith in that. Faith has been a problem for me. Right? It's one of my central problems is faith, a belief. And there's a whole lot of psychology behind that too that we don't have time to go into right now. But I've seen the evidence throughout this period that you can have faith. All right? I did not get the jobs that I thought I wanted or that made the most sense, but I really did get one. In the end, I got one, and it's a real curiosity. All right? It is a contract. It is not permanent. It's going to spit me out in a year someplace. And when you have begun to adopt this sort of non-attached approach to things, then you get to be a little bit curious, don't you? Like, this job's going to drop me out somewhere. Well, what is going to happen in a year? Like, what do we need a year for? All right, I could have been dropped into a full-time permanent job, and that would have been life for, I don't know, the next 10 years, 15 years, I don't know. Didn't happen. Didn't happen that way. Contract came. Oh, well. Doesn't that pique your curiosity? Like, how's this going to unfold? When I look back on this with 2020, what am I going to see that it's like, oh, of course it had to work out that way because it was what I needed until this particular opportunity came along, right? Or this decision was made. And when you are working from your ego, which is working from fear, working from anxiety, you're already upset. Like, you're already scared about what happens in a year. And full disclosure, I've had those moments. Okay. I've had those moments where I thought this thing ends in a year and I might be screwed. And then I've had to pull myself out of that very quickly. It's like, no, Jack, dude, look at the way this has already unfolded. When you really needed it, a friggin' job came. Okay. When you really needed it, a car was found and it was super duper easy. All of that unfolded incredibly easy when it actually decided to unfold. And that's another thing I'm learning, is that what's meant for you should unfold easily. What's meant for you should be easy. We make everything such a friggin' struggle, right? And we have this real suspicion of things that come together too easily. Like, I bought the first car that I test drove. I'm like, as I was doing it, I'm like, am I really going to do that? Am I really going to buy the first car that I test drive? Like, is that the smart thing to do? But it was like, no, this works. This works, right? This car works. The price works. The mileage works. I like it. Of course, it's easy. It was seamless. And so it was with the job. All right. The job went up. I applied to it. Stuff happened very, very quickly. Just click, 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 bang. It was in place. After months, months of laboring to get a job and being anxious and worried and upset about it, when I finally got one, it was like, boom, just happened very, very quickly. And it, for me, is just so reassuring and exciting to watch things fall into place very easily and very quickly. Sometimes I get frustrated that the universe always wants to do like one of those Hobbit things. The Hobbit movies in particular, everything is a last second rescue. It happens like 30 times throughout those movies. It's like, okay, We're leaning on that just a little bit hard here, but it seems like that's the way the universe actually operates. It's always friggin' the last second, but it comes through. And there was a period of time where I didn't trust that it would. And yet, it has proven to me in the past few months that, man, if you allow, if you surrender, if you let it go, damn it, it comes through. The stuff you need, man, you can't always get what you want. But if you try sometimes, you just might find you get what you need. And that's what I've been finding. Over the past few months, time and time again, I've been finding that you get what you need. And what you need isn't always what you think you want, right? And then ego can jump on that too. Like, this is not what I wanted. I wanted that job. I wanted this thing. I wanted that to happen. But you get what you need. Man, all of this has not been a few months. This has been 10 years. This is the culmination of 10 years of learning about attachment, learning about non-attachment, getting the crap beat out of me over and over and over by my own attachment, and then finally reaching a point of letting go. Tentatively. Again, I'm not great at this, but I've learned. And so I can look back at that episode that I released in January, slowly and painfully, wearily, you get back up and enter the fray. And yeah, sometimes life demands nerves of steel, but you know what? You can develop those. You can develop those. And it was a realization over the past little while that I may not have developed nerves of steel, but maybe nerves of like 20 or 30 pound test fishing line, where it was candy floss before, you know. And so there's a lot that sucks right now. There's a lot that's sucked over the past 3 or 4 months. There's stuff that's going to suck going forward. But just realizing that I've developed a little bit of capacity to handle it and watching the beautiful synchronicities that have unfolded over the past few months. It's just bringing me to this point of allowing and then being curious and even excited about what will unfold. And this is what spiritual teachers have been saying forever. It's just like, allow life to happen and watch the magic that can unfold. You know, the universe, life can deliver to you stuff beyond your wildest imagination, right? Because we human beings, we think from a very limited perspective, right? We put caps on stuff, no cap. The universe is coming from a much deeper wisdom and a much deeper knowledge of the way things are and what's possible and what is potential. Right? Our job is not to direct that. Our job is to allow that. And I've been trying so hard to direct and getting nowhere, you know, landing in a puddle in my backyard for the better part of 2020. And I had to learn the hard way. You know, other people are a little bit savvier than me. I had to learn the hard way to allow. And now that I'm learning and I'm in this position where I'm being asked to allow, it's exciting and it's really fun to just have kind of a curiosity about how things are going to go rather than a fear of them, right? Rather than trepidation, you can begin to approach life with a certain amount of curiosity. And so as we wrap up 2024, and we've established that we have nerves of 20 or 30 pound test fishing line, we go into 2025, which is going to be a consequential year. Trump will be in the White House. God knows what that's going to mean for the world. Sometimes you have to push away the macro, go a little bit micro. You can go into 2025 with curiosity. Right? This is it. This is just what I'm asking you to do. This is what I'm asking me to do. Not to enter into 2025 with all these great plans and resolutions and this and that and the other thing, but just with a simple curiosity about how can things change if you need them to change over the next year, right? And how can I get better at allowing things to unfold? It doesn't mean you stop working. It doesn't mean you stop doing stuff. I will continue practicing drums and trying to get better. I suspect I will keep trying to do this podcast. But all of that without trying to dictate and control how that labor what the fruit of that labor is. You just kind of work away at stuff you enjoy, stuff you feel like doing, without putting any pressure on the fruits of the labor. Very, very difficult to do. I'm still not great at that. But from this circumstance, I could be entering 2025 just consumed by bitterness, consumed by anger, consumed by hurt, consumed by fear of what happens at the end of my contract, trying to dictate and control every step of it, and developing more gallbladder attacks and bitterness and anger and living my life in that way and throwing up all the roadblocks that stuff would throw up. Instead, maybe we can enter into 2025 with a simple curiosity and a willingness to allow stuff to unfold and a faith that allowing will be for the best, that life will deliver unto us the best for us. Even though it may not seem as though that's what we wanted, can we trust that we'll get what we need? And my faith is strengthened because I've seen it happen over the past few months. I have seen what I need come into fruition when I stepped back and just simply allowed the circumstances to be what they are. And this is the most woo-woo episode I've done in a long time, but I don't care. When you have gone through what I've gone through and you've been stripped raw, you've had all of your pretense, all of your artifice, all of that reputation and that dignity you've tried so hard to defend. When you've had all that stripped away, you begin to care less and less and less. So if my woo-woo stuff is not for you, that's okay. Maybe this episode isn't for you, but maybe it's for somebody else. And I'm just going to say what I'm going to say these days because I have no reason not to. And what I'm saying to you is not a fabrication, all right? I'm not trumping this stuff up, no pun intended. This has been my experience. And over the past few months, as life has fallen apart, I've been more and more and more reassured that it's disassembling to reassemble into something better, right? And yippee-ki-yay, mofo. Can we not get behind that? And, stuff's going to come along that isn't necessarily what I was looking for, but I'm getting better and better and better at allowing that. And I hope you do too, right? So I hope you enjoy this festive friggin' season because it's great. Christmas is freaking great. Warm your cockles, man. I hope you have the eggnog with the rum in it or whatever it is that tickles your toes, whatever tickles your fancy. I hope that this holiday season is fun and gentle and edifying and uplifting and reassuring for you too. Hope your cockles are warmed, And I want to thank you genuinely for listening. I know that this year has been sporadic. I've struggled. I've really, really, really struggled at times to keep this thing going. In fact, at times I haven't kept it going, but those who have hung with me, I genuinely appreciate that. We're over 200 episodes now. We're coming up on the 6th anniversary of this thing. And at this time of year, I'm just always grateful. I'm always grateful for the people who listen and the people who support and who share. And I'm grateful to all of you. If what you're tuning in for is music recommendations, I've not turned this into a Song of the Year episode. I kind of lost the trail of new music as I lost the trail of doing the show really over the past few months. But 2024 has been great. 2024, I encountered some music that was really, really great. And I'm not doing the traditional top 10 countdown here, but as I look through the John Huff podcast reference on the podcast 2024 playlist on Spotify, I see Don't Forget Me by Maggie Rogers. I see Average Boy by Nightbus. Anywhere Else by Sloves. Addiction by that Japanese band Hitsuji Bungaku. WYG by Everlet, Armed and Dangerous by Issa, All for All by Invasion. I mean, this just goes on and on and on. So many songs that I genuinely freaking love. Butterfly by Unto Others. Indifferent by Rowena Wise. Full of Chemicals by Rosalie James. I mean, we listen to music from all over the world. We listen to some hardcore metal, the New Kitty stuff. We listened to some great Americana. We listened to a lot of shoegaze this year. And a lot of those songs I genuinely love, man. I genuinely love a lot of those tunes. And so for Song of the Year, I think I can only really kind of go with the one that I listened to the most. And what I listened to most was Armed and Dangerous by Issa, who we decided was, I think she was maybe Norwegian, something like that. And this is just another, and it's like the winner every year is a throwback 80s tune. But this is like, she's a great singer. There's a great riff on this song. I loved the chorus on it. And it's a total 100% 80s hair, kind of with keyboards, glam song. And it just always comes back to that for me, doesn't it? 19 Summertime was the winner last year, 2 years, I can't remember. Always tends to be a throwback glam metal kind of song. So Issa, wherever you are, Armed and Dangerous is my song of the year. But I loved WYG by Everlet. Where'd You Go? Just great. Anywhere Else by Sloves. I forget where we decided they were from. Thailand? Philippines? Something like that. And the song Anywhere Else could easily have been my song of the year. It's a shoegaze tune, but it's heavy. All this stuff is on the playlist. If you haven't listened to it, go do it, man. Just put it on with your eggnog and rum. When you're trimming the tree, man, just put on that playlist. There's some really, really terrific stuff out there, man. Rock and roll is not dead. The music, it's still out there. And listen to some great stuff. So whatever happens with the podcast, if I keep doing it, I need to resume listening to new music and telling you about it. Well, we'll get to all that in the new year. I suspect that's it for this year, kids. I want to thank you so much for listening and for supporting, and everyone who's just been there. Everyone who's been there throughout the past few months as all this has been going down. I so appreciate it. I so appreciate you listening. Do have the very best of holiday seasons. I will check back in with you in the new year. Until then, folks, good things happen when you put yourself out there. And hey, kids, I'll check you later. Yeah. Your love is armed and dangerous. I already did this. I did it at the end of that episode. Great song. Issa, wherever you are. A lot of great music this year. That is my song of the year. Hey, kids. Just shut up, man.